Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Behind the Human. I'm your host, Mark Champagne, and it's my job to unpack the stories and mental fitness practices of people living at the top of their game personally and professionally. Today, we've got Dr. Dave Rabin on the show, who is a neuroscientist, board-certified psychiatrist, health tech entrepreneur, and inventor who has been studying the impact of chronic stress in humans for over 15 years. He's the co-founder and chief medical officer at Apollo Neuroscience, which has developed the first scientifically validated wearable technology that actively improves sleep, relaxation, focus, and calm using a novel touch therapy that signals safety to the brain. I mean, we could all use that, no doubt there. Dave, welcome to the show. Who are you?
I am a researcher and inventor and adventurer. I'm really passionate about learning new things about the world around us and about ourselves. I think that, one of the things that I was told growing up by different people were that, anything is possible and, that we can achieve anything in our lives. There's basically no limits, but we're often confronted by constant limits, right?
Yeah.
And people saying, oh, you can't do that, or you can't do this. And it started to, these incongruities in what we were taught growing up started to just make me question, what is it we're actually capable of, and how do we figure that out? What is the point of us being here in this life? And I think that's the greatest adventure that we ever have the chance to embark on. And then that is really the discovery of our consciousness and what we're capable of as human beings. And so I really have been fascinated by that for my entire life, and just trying to, put our human potential to the limits and test, what we can get out of ourselves in this life, and really trying to take us to the next level.
How do you see just the notion of adventure and how adventure shows up in your life? How do you see that kind of morphing who you are today? But also, I've heard you say, and I agree with this as well, that who we are is continually upgrading or evolving, right? I mean, there are definitely through lines that I think that are characteristics that stay with us, but there's also, and this is fun, I mean, I hope this is the case with you. I mean, whenever there's repeat guests, since this is the opening question, I always love to pull how they answered that question, a couple of years ago or so, and it's fun to see the evolution. But for you, like that sense of adventure, and I feel that in doing the research for this episode, has been so strong throughout, your entire life. Like, what's the link there for you?
I think adventure for me is really, when you think about whether you're going out, on a river rafting trip for the first time, or you're going out into the uncharted wilderness of a mountain, or just doing anything new that you've never done before. There's, adventure really encompasses this idea of being excited to discover the unknown, right? And I think the unknown for us has a lot of scary things about it, but it also has a lot of really exciting things about it. And we don't know what we're going to find until we start to know the unknown. Yeah. And unfortunately, in our society, I think that our sense of adventure in large part has been diminished because we're so focused on, these words like stability and balance and these things, which are all important, but it's really, how do we maintain stability and balance in the face of the unknown? Because there's so much more in the world that we don't know than we do know. And and the unknown is just full of wealth for discovery, right? This is what drove the early explorers to travel the world on boats, and they had no idea where they were going back in the, in the 1400s through the 1800s and even before that, and just discovering all of what was possible, what was available in the world to us as human beings. And, I think that thrill of discovery is actually one of the most exciting things that we can ever experience as human beings. And so adventure to me is really teeing ourselves up for the opportunity for that thrill of discovery.
I love that. I love the excitement around the unknown. And I feel like I've gone through some phases like that on my journey as well, where there was a flip at one point of to your point, kind of fearing the unknown to, okay, no, there's a whole alternate way of viewing this or perspective of being excited about this unknown. So I'm curious though, practically speaking, do you recall any moments where you actually did fear certain big moments in your life where there was, fear attached to the unknown, and how were you able to kind of pause and recalibrate or reset?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's universal to human beings, right? I think the unknown in and of itself, just what we don't know, including everything. So that's like, if you think about everything we know as that we know is like a tiny sliver of what's available to us in our awareness, and then there's all the stuff that we don't know that we know that's like a slightly bigger sliver, and then there's this giant, the rest of everything, which is everything we don't know. And that includes everything we don't know about ourselves, right?
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
And I think that if you look back evolutionarily, going back like, to the most ancient humans, 50,000 or more years ago, I think and even further back to ancient mammals, 100 million years ago, the nervous system in our bodies evolved to, in many cases, initially fear the unknown, because unknown means uncertainty, and uncertainty means, or unfamiliarity, right? Something we're not familiar with, something we haven't experienced before. And if it's unfamiliar, it could be uncertain. And if it's uncertain, it could potentially be threatening.
Yeah.
Right. So there's a default nervous system pathway that's hardwired into our bodies and our brains that says, hey, if you're about to experience something that's unknown, you should be on guard. And when we're under stress, or we're experiencing chronic stress in our lives in any way, and it could just be overwhelmed, like too much going on, that sets our fight or flight fear response system up a little bit. And so when we go to experience the unknown, naturally we are slightly more on edge, slightly more on guard, less open-minded to what it is that we could be taking in and to the experience as a whole. And so I think it's really natural, and if not just natural, but maybe the default setting, that we approach the unknown with a slight amount of fear. And that goes back to what you mentioned earlier, which is this critical importance of safety. Because if you can have a guide, for instance, into the unknown, a guide being anything from a book to another human being who's helping, show you what it's like to go into the backcountry for the first time, or climb a mountain you've never climbed for the first time, or just do anything you've never done for the first time, then all of a sudden that guide provides us with this sense of safety, because they know something that we don't know, and they can kind of guide us through the process of our own self-discovery safely. And that safety is really, really critical, because that brings down the fear response. It brings down the stress response system and says, hey, you're safe enough to just take in this unknown because you have somebody there who's going to help facilitate for you. And that's the same thing that we talk about when we enter psychedelic experiences with our patients. And that's why we always recommend having a guide with you, because sometimes even the unknown within ourselves can be scary. Dreams can be scary, right? Discovering, past memories about ourselves or why we are the way we are can be scary, or painful if they're painful memories. And there's lots of stuff in there that can be really, unnerving. And so I think it's really common that we all experience fear or apprehension in these cases. But the goal is, how do we remind ourselves that we're safe enough to not turn back?
Mm. Dave, how did you get started in this work? Like, what led you, or what kind of questions were you asking at a younger age to say, hey, I'd love to explore the realm of psychiatry and neurology, and probably didn't know you'd become a health tech founder at that point, or entrepreneur, but like, what started that journey for you?
I definitely didn't know I was going to become a health tech founder and mentor. I had no understanding of that path, but I think it did start very young for me, probably around maybe the age of 6 or 7, when I started to notice that I was having really vivid dreams as a kid. And these were not necessarily scary dreams. Some of them were occasionally scary, but most of them were just very real feeling. And They were so real. And many people, now that I'm older, talking to many people, especially as a psychiatrist, I know that lots of people have dreams like this. But as a kid, you don't really talk to anybody except your parents and your friends. And so we didn't really, as a child, you don't necessarily have the words to verbalize what's happening in your dreams. But I found myself, referencing conversations that I would have or experiences I would have with my brothers or with friends in dreams that then I would bring up in reality, in regular waking life, and people would have no idea what I was talking about. And I would instantly realize that that happened in a dream and they weren't actually there. And
wow.
so that was really interesting. And as I got older, into the 7-8-year-old range, I started to develop more language to describe these experiences, started to maybe occasionally have more scary dreams. And so I'd go to my parents and say, hey, what are these dreams? Why are we having them? And I think, like most parents, my parents tried to just assuage any fears that I had and remind me that, dreams aren't real. They can't hurt you. Don't worry about it. And they were really just trying to make me not afraid to go to bed, which was important, like many parents do. But I think that as I continued to have these dreams, not all the time, but every now and then, that felt so real, when my parents are saying, these aren't real, and then I'm having these experiences and they feel as real as waking life, it really started to make me question, what is real? What is this word, right? Because we're in that age range, we're like learning how to adapt language to experience and describe experience with words. And this word real was just not consistently being used in a way that made sense. So I had started asking, to myself in a very basic way, maybe the adults don't know what real is. Maybe there's more to this word. And I became immediately fascinated with dreams. And so I always wanted to study dreams. And then I learned about, of course, psychology and Freud and Carl Jung. And as I got older and started reading about the subconscious and the unconscious and everything that exists beneath this waking conscious reality that we're all engaged in right now. And so that kind of, rapidly led me down the path of, the fields that study that, which are neuroscience and psychiatry, psychology, and that kind of thing.
It's I'm sure you've thought about this or reflected on it, but just knowing a bit of your background and the work that you're doing, especially when it comes to some of the psychedelic work, it's almost like you've kind of come full circle in that sense, where I'm not saying psychedelics are dreams, but like you could feel like you're in dreamlike states and living, surfacing insights from almost just different worlds, I guess you can say, in a way. And it seems like you're kind of coming full circle from how it all started and from questioning the adults. I've heard you say it. I'm laughing when you were saying that because my eldest son is around the age where you were doing that. He's 8 years old. And I think of some of the questions he asks us as parents, and, we could kind of take a pause and, oh, that's a damn good question. I don't really know. I wish I asked that question, right? And it's just so beautiful to see their minds at that age, and if we could just stay like that, right? And I think a lot of us try to get back to that. Yeah, exactly. But I feel like a lot of people, and I've been down that track as well, and obviously, I think I'm coming back, but following the curiosity. But we numb out, kind of as the world and as society evolves and our journey kind of progresses. So I think a lot of the work that you're doing around safety on so many different topics is what's the word I'm trying to find here, can be a little bit of an antidote to that natural, I wish it wasn't a natural progression, but that progression of just kind of almost getting onto autopilot and just rolling through the days and, numbing out for whatever the reasons are. If we start talking a little bit more about this topic and finding the tools and the practices and whether they're devices or different modalities to help us get back to that sense of safety, it could be super helpful. So my question, Dave, especially in present day when we're recording this in 2024, there is no shortage of change and technological evolution and just what feels like a lot of uncertainty. And I really do think over the next 5 years, we're about to see just unparalleled levels of that exponential change. which can be really exciting and I think also very terrifying for a lot of people, and we see this with a lot of the mental health stats and rates. Obviously what we're doing is not working, and I feel like there's more of that to come. So from your perspective and all your work, like how do we tackle this world or this environment of massive change that we're in right now, and that's to come even further?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a great question. So I think this is one of my favorite things to talk about because, I think we have a lot of work to do in terms of improving the education that we give each other from the latest discoveries in neuroscience and mental health, psychiatry, psychology, et cetera, and passing that down to everybody else so that everybody understands what it really means to be human. And what it means to be human is that we are adaptable creatures, right? The reason why humans still exist on the earth despite all adversity, is because of two major features, characteristics, abilities we have that we evolved. And we evolved the ability to adapt solo. So being able to bounce back from stress, to face challenge and overcome it as individuals. And then we evolved the ability, which is to collaboratively adapt. So to work together, which many other animals don't have the same ability, but to using language and using other features of humanness that we can adapt together by working together to overcome much more tremendous challenges. And, that could include things like global pandemics or any number of other things that we faced over famine, right? Environmental issues, like all of the things that have challenged humans since we've been on the earth, especially the last 2,000 years. We overcame them by working together. Like you can look at any city in the world and see that recognize immediately that majesty of what we built, which we built together. There's no single human being that built a city, right? It's all from working together. And the maintenance of that environment that we create for ourselves requires us to continue to work together. And there are entire regions of our brains that we evolved over probably 100 million years that resulted in these conserved areas that are called, for example, the insular cortex, which is the core of the emotional nervous system that is responsible for empathy, feeling what other people feel, introspection, self-reflection, looking inside ourselves, feeling our own feelings, and then interoception, feeling our bodies, bodily awareness or somatic awareness. And these are all conserved in one part of the brain called the insula. And that part of the brain is critical for collaborative adaptation, right? We need empathy. Yeah. We need to be able to feel what other people feel and to be aware of our own feelings at the same time, to be able to work together and not just be selfish dicks all the time.
Yeah.
Right. That we need that. We're not all like, old world chimpanzees. We're all like fighting each other for everything all the time. It's not about power and control all the time. We have higher brain functions that allow us to overcome those primal urges with consideration and well thought out practices. But we don't always tap into them because we were not taught that they exist. So I think when we start to recognize that, yes, the world is changing every day, we're changing every day. There's sometimes, if you think about what you said, right, there's more change that we're facing now on a daily basis than ever because of how much information we have coming in to our lives all the time from smartphones and screens and all these other things. We know if we know our special superpower is to adapt, then we can train that. And then we can train it like a muscle. And as we learn to focus on that as a skill, then we can train ourselves to adapt really, really, really well. As we learn to adapt better, all of a sudden, when more intense challenges come into our lives, we say, meh, I can deal with that. I got this. Not, oh my God, why me? Why is this happening to me? What did I do wrong that this is now my life, right? Those are the kind of extremes that we respond to stress with. And when we say why me, or which we all have done, right? And what's wrong with me that this happened to me? And there's certain religions that encourage that thought process more. There's a certain negative self-reference that occurs where we start to look at ourselves as there's something wrong with us that we have to face challenge. But there's nothing wrong with us that we have to face challenge. Neuroscience has proven this, and so have ancient cultures have talked about this for thousands of years. It's just it's up to us to learn how to adapt to those challenges and to understand what can I learn from this situation and not take it personally so that I can grow from it as much as possible. And that mental perception of what is challenge and what does this mean to me or about me and what can I learn from it actually shifts the entire outcome of our ability to adapt. So seeing adaptation as a muscle is a critical neuroscience learning that actually helps us as an entire human species to be able to, overcome stress and challenge in a way that no other species on the earth can do.
Thank you. I mean, I have so many questions based on what you just said, but the two things that are coming to mind. The first thing just being how powerful perspective can be around even just taking a minute to think about what you said around that we're designed and we have evolved to adapt, and that we're because it often feels like this, but we're not alone in doing that, right? And that's what I love about like studying Stoicism and just different cultures and whatnot. You can see all the evidence of this, right? There's been massive change. It's always been change. That's how we've evolved, of course. And to your point about creating cities and going through, what we'd call natural disasters or whatever. There's a million different examples, but just first starting from a place of, okay, we've been through things, let's just say, in the past, and people have come together, and I'm not alone, and I don't know what the future holds. I know there's going to be continued change, but I don't have to go through that alone. Then on top of that, the question that surfaces for me is around the idea of, well, if we can train ourselves to better adapt, what does that look like? And I'm sure there are many ways to do this, of course, but for you, kind of what's the core protocol that you've either gone down or that you would suggest when working with your clients, or frankly, in any capacity, just like what do you know works well that's tangible?
So unsurprisingly, most of the techniques that we use to train adaptation are actually very old. And neuroscience is really, it's a fascinating time for neuroscience because we're finally starting to prove a lot of that. And these ancient techniques and that are thousands of years old or more. And, I think the core of it comes back to reminding ourselves that we're safe in the face of challenge. And there are lots of techniques for doing that. But if we trick ourselves into thinking that the too much incoming information or too many responsibilities or too much email or news or any of these things that don't actually have an impact on our immediate survival are threatening to us and threatening to our survival, then our ability to adapt goes into the toilet. Because we can't adapt effectively when we're in full fight or flight mode. We literally give up most of our resources to our recovery nervous system, which includes creativity and reproduction and digestion and the absorption of food and nutrients and immunity and all of those things that help us to adapt and feel good and recovered, that allow us to cope with stress more effectively. Even our vision shrinks. So when you're under a fight or flight situation, stress situation, our vision goes to tunnel vision. And so you only see what's in front of you. And that's an evolved fight or flight response. So what happens when you start to feel calm and recovered and more relaxed? Tunnel vision widens and you start to get peripheral vision. You start to see everything else beyond just what's right in front of you that seems to be the threat right now. And so that is immediately a shift in perspective, right?
Yeah.
And what some people call like widening the window of awareness. And so by reminding ourselves that we're actually safe in times where we perceive ourselves to be threatened or unsafe, then that is the single most important thing that helps us to put our bodies into a state of higher adaptability. And now you can actually measure it by looking at things like vagus nerve activity or heart rate variability, which is one of our best measures through the skin that now most wearable trackers track of vagus nerve activity and our body's ability to adapt to and recover from stress. And the techniques for training that, of course, and improving our adaptability are not surprising either. They are intentional breathing, right?
Yeah.
Directing your attention to your breath in any moment immediately reminds us that we are safe enough to take a deep breath despite everything else that's going on, right? It immediately restores our attention control to our bodies and brings us back into the present moment. So it takes us out of the past and out of the future and brings us right back into our bodies where our breath lives, and then allows us to restore a sense of control and agency, autonomy, and even mastery over ourselves and our environment a little bit. And that helps to restore a sense of safety almost immediately. And then what follows from that is things like intentional listening. So just choosing to listen to what's going on in here, or listen to what's going on around us, or to sing, to produce sound, which is a combination of like listening and breathing. Then there's things like soothing touch, whether you apply it to yourself by giving yourself a hug or getting a hug or having a consensual soothing touch experience with a loved one or a pet. And then there's things like intentional movement. So you're directing your mind to say, I want to move right now. What's that doing? Well, it's saying, I am taking control over my body in this moment, right? I'm reminding myself I'm safe enough, despite everything else going on, to move my body around because I decided to.
Yeah.
The body does not allow us to do that when we're running from an actual lion. That is not going to happen, right? There's these highly evolved nervous system pathways that say when you're actually running from a lion, you are actually running from that lion to get to safety. And all of these voluntary parts of self-control and self-regulation get shut down automatically. So when we do things that remind us that we're in control of our bodies in the moment, from breath to movement to singing, listening, touch, sleep is another important one. When we show ourselves that we're safe enough to fall asleep and get good rest, all of a sudden we wake up more adaptable, right? Our bodies get most of their recovery at night when we're in deep and REM sleep, and you can measure it. And so it's really practicing these core basic techniques that are all ancient, very, very basic human techniques that we can do at any time wherever we are, that start to train that muscle of adaptability, and they continue to train it over time. And that builds something we call resilience. And then there are lots of modern techniques we can now use to do that too. But those are the core of what we teach everyone to do, and what we should be in our practice, and what we should be teaching every single human being to do from, as you know, ideally before they learn how to speak, right? This is the most important part of being human.
It's just, I'm always so amazed, and I shouldn't be shocked by this, but how it always comes back to the basics, right? And as a species, I feel like we often default to overcomplicating things and making, you know, even in the development and kind of well-being space, like you can go crazy with, you know, protocols and rituals and routines and so forth. And I mean, I'm a fan. I mean, I've used Apollo. I use a Whoop as well, and so I'm a fan of technology and so forth. But also, I also know when I need more sleep. You know, just in general. And you know, we don't have to get so complicated. Just go to bed maybe a little bit earlier and run your own experiment, and surprise, typically wake up feeling more rested and so forth. And I love your lens though around. Because this, like I said, I feel like we don't talk about this that often, but just the safety lens, like even just the subtle language that you mentioned around, I'm safe enough to fall asleep, which makes, like, I can see us, you know, on, you know, in the jungle or whatever, where if you don't feel like you're safe or you're going to get eaten that night, you're not going to fall asleep. Like, it just makes perfect sense from an evolution standpoint. It's brilliant. I love it. It's such a subtle shift in language and perspective.
Yeah, language is everything, right?
Yeah.
The words, and this is again indigenous knowledge that the words we use define and describe our reality. Yeah. So if we learn how to use language to correctly describe what's going on, then all of the stuff becomes a lot more clear and simple. And it's really about separating actual threat from perceived threat, and knowing when and training ourselves to know, hey, I'm actually safe right now despite feeling completely overwhelmed and stressed, or I'm actually under threat. Let's get to safety so that I can then feel safe enough to start the recovery process. But those are really two completely separate parts of experience. And the nervous system is divided in that way. So the parasympathetic vagal rest and recovery nervous system is one half that governs all recovery in the body. And it literally, when we feel safe, it literally diverts all blood flow to reproduction, digestion, immunity, sleep, recovery, all of those things. And when we are in creativity and empathy included there too, all the stuff that's not important for running from a lion. And then when we're under an actual survival threat, which is really only lack of food, lack of water, lack of air, lack of physical safety and shelter, like being chased by a lion. And then you might include being, lack of community, right? Being excluded by a community as a secondary part, because being part of a community was critical for historical survival in the jungle or the wilderness.
Yeah.
That when those things are present, then we are safe. When we don't have those issues, we are safe. When we have those issues, we need to deal with them immediately, right? That becomes the first priority. So if we can check all the boxes, say, I have enough air, water, food, shelter, physical safety, and I know I'm not alone, then we can go, we give ourselves full permission to engage in the recovery process, the healing process, the learning process, the adaptability process, and then, of course, reproduction, food absorption, fighting off illness, sleep, all of those things become unlocked for us. And that's what we need to remember, that, that neuroscience is now showing full circle are true, and that we can tap into that anytime.
Well, and this is where, in my work with teams and individuals and so forth, this is where the language, I think, of where mental fitness comes in, because this is kind of what that is just for reminding ourselves. And just as we do with the physical body, the more we train our muscles, the more they grow and so forth and strengthen. I think we just need to be conscious of, it may take some time to just, I'm in that loop again. Just take, to your point, just literally take a couple breaths, the thing that keeps us alive that we don't think about often, and find ourselves kind of crouching forward while we're typing away on our computers and literally restraining our breath, right? And just take a minute, sit up straight, take a nice breath, and go through that cycle or those reminders. And then reorient ourselves, right? And doing that over and over again, just trains us to respond in different ways as those perceived threats, surface day in and day out and so forth, right? I do want to talk about, I'm assuming, because I'd love to know how Apollo came to be, and I'm assuming it links to that, those foundational touch principles, as like we're humans, we evolve with other people and species and so forth, and touch is important, right? In a world where I find, we're becoming more and more isolated, I think this is even more important. And this is something I'd like to talk to you about maybe in a different podcast, but as for listeners know, I've been recording a series around demystifying psychedelics. And what continues to come up on that series is like the psychedelics are like this big, and the community and the belief system and the rituals and the wisdom and so forth, like that's the big part of, and those are the questions I feel like we're not asking, and hence why we're running this series. But coming back to community and touch and so forth, like how does that all link into what you and the team have created at Apollo?
That's a great question. So basically, the short story of Apollo is that I was working with veterans with severe post-traumatic stress disorder, and treating them in the clinic, in the VA, and the hospital outpatient clinics. And, with all the treatments that we had available, they just, and still have available as legal medical gold standard treatments, over 70% of our patients were not getting better long-term. So they still have PTSD for life.
Yeah.
And that was really just, and most people don't know this, but veterans have I think over 2 times the suicide rate of the average American.
Wow.
So this is a really underserved community when
Mm.
they come back from conflict zones or service, and they're providing a very important service. So we really need to be serving this community better. And it was really surprising to me that people who have had such stress resilience training, possibly more than any other human being or most other human beings in the Western world, because they have to do basic training and they have to do all these like intense stress trainings and recovery trainings. And yet they come back to civilian life and can barely function. Yeah. And this was really surprising and interesting to me.
Yeah, you would think it'd be the opposite. It's like you're in these wild conflict zones and whatnot, and able to perform in those environments, and you come back to the life where it should be almost easy. And it's like the opposite.
Exactly. And so that was really fascinating to me. And I think we didn't have a good explanation for it, other than that when you actually work with these folks and you study them, or you study traumatized animal models, that what ends up happening is the nervous system, that fight or flight stress response system we were talking about earlier, gets so tightly trained to believe that we're under threat all the time, that when these folks come back to civilian life, even though civilian life is much safer than the life that they lived in conflict zones, they still believe themselves to be under threat. And so their nervous system has actually learned threat. It's trained in fear. And those neural pathways around fear tied to the fight or flight system are very tight and very active. And so what I started to think about was my own psychotherapy training, and medical training, which is that, and we don't talk about this as often in medicine anymore, but that safety and the trusting relationship between the patient and the provider, the clinician, is the foundation of all healing. If you come to a therapist or a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist starts asking you really deep questions about yourself, and you don't feel safe around that person, well, why would you tell them any of your deep, dark secrets? Right?
That's a good point. Yeah.
But those deep, dark secrets we all have are how we are getting those out, are how we heal, because it gives us perspective on the way we think about ourselves, which may not be 100% accurate. And that helps us to reevaluate the way we make meaning around ourselves in the world. And so seeing that safety was so important, and seeing that the medication-based treatments and many of the treatments we were using for these veterans were not targeting the safety pathway, I started to look at other things in the literature that people had studied that did actually target the safety pathway. And what I found was, and the main reason for this is because if you look at animal models of trauma, safety learning extinguishes fear learning. This is well known.
Okay.
So you can actually, and Eric Kandel won the Nobel Prize in 2000 for discovering the way we learn and remember, and it's all around fear and safety, and it goes back over 300 million years. So This is well known now, well known. It's just poorly taught. So starting to see those relationships between being able to untrain fear learning with safety learning, I started to look at all these natural and otherwise techniques that help to boost safety learning in the body, that do work for veterans and other people who suffer with severe PTSD and mental illness. And what I found was that the techniques are the breathing, the soothing touch, soothing music, all these things that people are using in their day-to-day lives on the lowest end, the easiest to access end, but they're hard to practice. You have to practice them a lot, and get them a lot. And then on the other side was things like psychedelic assisted therapy, which had, at the time when I started became interested in that field, it was about 2012. And we had just had some of the first major publications coming out in top tier journals highlighting the potential of psychedelic assisted therapy to treat what we call treatment resistant mental illness. So people with PTSD, for instance, who have tried everything and not had a response to treatment that lasted. And so I found MDMA-assisted therapy as a very interesting model, because MDMA therapy seems to work. And so I became fascinated immediately by psychedelic medicines and how they're working, because they were getting tremendous results, and really starting to look at how they worked. And I've always been interested in how these work, because going back to our beginning of our conversation, psychedelic medicines do bring my interest full circle in that they seem to decrease our sense of ego, self-protection, survival brain, and help us to become aware of all of this stuff that's in our subconscious, unconscious, effectively like under the hood of our high performance vehicle that we're not normally aware of. And so that is effectively what happens when we dream. So dreams are really like the original psychedelic state that we all access, where different parts of our minds become available to us. Psychedelic medicines do that by introducing a drug in a safe environment. And so when I started to look at how MDMA-assisted therapy worked, what I found from the animal research and the human research was that MDMA-assisted therapy seems to work by amplifying safety pathways in the emotional brain. And that when you increase safety in the emotional brain in the context of an already safe therapy experience with one or two really skilled guides that are holding this nice, safe container for you, as we call it, to experience whatever comes up, then all of a sudden you feel safe enough to go back and remake meaning around past traumatic events that might have changed the way you saw yourself or the world. And the core of it was all safety. It was all just boosting that sense of safety, which is one of the most common reports that anybody who has these psychedelic therapy experiences says is, I felt safer than I felt in as long as I can remember. Right?
Yeah.
So that's kind of where it all started. And then from there, I ended up having a really great conversation with Rick Doblin in 2016 and suggested to him that the results that he was getting from these trials with MDMA were some of the best we've ever seen for any mental illness, of which he was already aware, but that we needed to figure out how MDMA therapy is actually working in the brain and body to induce these effects, because if we can figure that out, then perhaps we can start to replicate some of the benefits of MDMA without a drug or without MDMA. And that solves this access to care problem to get, treatment out to the 40 million or more Americans that are struggling with PTSD who don't have access to MDMA therapy. And we still don't have access to MDMA therapy. It's on the FDA's desk now. Hopefully it will be fast-tracked for the end of the year. But even when it's legal, it's going to be $10,000 to $14,000 per person. It's not going to be covered by insurance, and it requires a lot of time and energy, and there's not a lot of people who provide that service. So it's going to take many years, if not decades, to treat everybody. And so Rick thought this was an interesting idea. It allowed me and three of my colleagues to get MDMA therapy trained. And then we went back to the lab and we started to research the different natural ways to augment the same neural pathways that MDMA activates, these safety pathways.
Okay. Wow.
And so soothing touch came to the surface, because it's not just touch, but all soothing sensations increase safety in the body. It could be hearing your favorite song. It could be getting a hug. It could be smelling your mom's chicken soup. It could be tasting some of your favorite food, right? All of these things that are soothing increase safety in the body. But which is most portable, most instantaneous, and requires the least effort? It's soothing touch, because somebody you like can just hold your hand on a bad day and you instantly feel better. Why does that work, right? It's fascinating. We've never had a good explanation for that. And so we started to go back and research this and realize that there are actually ways that you can activate the touch receptor system using technology like Apollo that you see on my chest here, that just delivers gentle, soothing waves of vibration that kind of feel like Om, or feel like doing a deep breathing exercise, or like a cat purring on your body, that reliably stimulate the touch receptors in a way that sends that conserved safety signal to the brain that says, hey, if you can feel this right now, then you're safe, right?
Yeah.
And so that starts to trigger and train over time this safety experience that you can then carry with you for somebody who has never like even myself, I never learned how to deep breathe properly, never learned how to meditate or be mindful properly. Now I've trained myself with this. And this tool is targeting, it's not a full MDMA experience. Maybe we can get you like 40 to 60% of the way there, but it's enough to help you feel safe enough to remake meaning around stress and widen your window and help you to reevaluate what's stressing you out in your life, so that you can approach life from an adaptable, safe perspective rather than from a tunnel vision, fear, fight or flight perspective.
Fascinating. I need to have dinner with your mind. I think I need three. I need a good 3 hours, Dave.
Let's do it.
I mean, it's and just for everyone that's listening, just so you can have a visual in your mind. I mean, what I love about Apollo is I mean, I'm going to be dating myself now at this point, but it like think of like an old school pager in a way. It's not much bigger than that. If frankly, it might be a bit smaller.
Smaller.
And yeah, it's smaller. There you go. And you can clip it kind of anywhere. I mean, I've worn it around my ankle. Basically, the idea is you want to have it on a bone of some sort, right? For that frequency or the vibration. I've had it on my wrist. I've used the clip and just put it on the side of like my pants on like the hip bone and whatnot. And you just leave it there and kind of, you've got an app obviously that controls everything. And I love the schedules, so you can really like just set it and forget it. And based on I mean, I'm assuming all of your research and science, like you have timed, experiences throughout the day to help focus, to help calm, to help, of course, sleep and so forth. And it's so accessible. Like we're not talking about like some sort of, multi-$1,000 kind of device you got to strap on your head. And, there's a lot of stuff out there. This is a couple $100. It's on Amazon. And away you go, kind of thing. While everything else is being worked on in the science and so forth is progressing. So good on you and the team for doing everything you can to help. Because I think we need it, right? And this in combination with everything we've been speaking about around getting back to the basics can really put us in a great place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think for us, being translational neuroscientists, where we're trying to take neuroscience discoveries and make them available and accessible to everyone, this was a really exciting discovery for us because it helped us to understand, hey, we realize how important the safety system is. We know that the system is dysregulated in most of us and out of balance. So if safety seems to be the key that all the arrows are pointing to, then if we make something that restores the safety or reminds us that we're safe in our bodies on the go, and that's accessible to everyone, then we're all going to function a little bit better, right? Yeah. We're all going to get that much closer to accessing our potential in any given moment. And that was actually a big part of why we released Apollo to the general public as a consumer wearable in 2020, because we originally developed it as a medical technology at my research at the University of Pittsburgh Medical Center, but very quickly started testing the prototypes on ourselves and our friends and family and everyone we knew, and had everybody we knew wearing it around. And we realized that it was dramatically changing our lives, and we don't have a diagnosis. And so being able to see the impact firsthand, but then of course also seeing it on our patients, was so powerful that it resulted in us saying, hey, this is gentle, soothing sound waves. This technology has never demonstrated any side effects in our studies or anybody else's studies before us. Let's just make this available to everyone so that kids can use it and adults, pregnant women can use it, and elderly folks can use it. And let's just make it really easy to access that safety that we all were born with the ability to access, that maybe we weren't taught how to get to, that you can then take with you, and it trains you how to get there more easily. Because just that little thing, if all the neuroscience theory is right and all those arrows pointing to safety are right, just nudging that little thing and making that one change should have a dramatic impact on all of our lives. And lo and behold, it did.
It does, yeah.
Which is so exciting, right? And that's going back to the beginning of the conversation. That is the beauty of discovery and adventure, right? Yeah. Like that is the most thrilling thing that we have ever found in all of my research that actually worked, because most research doesn't translate into the real world, and that actually is changing people's lives through the neuroscience combined with technology.
Dave, we're out of time. We definitely need another, we're going to have to schedule something, whether it's on this show or because I'd love to talk to you about, learn a little bit more about psychedelics and those safety pathways on the other series. I feel like that'd be a fascinating conversation. But for now, I'm just blown away with, again, the subtle shift in looking at all of this from the lens of safety and how accessible that is. And it seems so subtle. It almost feels like, well, obviously, you I want to say that in your mind. So, I mean, thank you. Thank you for making some time to come on the show, but a higher thank you for you and the team dedicating so much energy and time and resources to bringing this topic to as many people as possible. It feels refreshing and really encouraging, and definitely less alone, knowing that you and the team are out there doing this work. So thank you.
Oh, it's absolutely our pleasure. And that's another big neuroscience takeaway, I think, for everyone is none of us are alone, right? There's every other human on the world, on the earth pretty much has at some point experienced the hardship that we are experiencing. And that's the nature of being human, is that hardship is a part of it, and challenge is a part of it. And so if we remember this certain universality of the human experience, that we're all human first before we're anything else, and we all suffer the same challenges and have to go through a similar growth process, then it becomes very clear that we are absolutely in no way ever alone. Like, we're always connected to the greater whole. And, what could make us feel more safe than that?
Well said.